2. Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. Certainly not the best of circumstances as I'm wandering aimlessly through the Ravens locker room at midnight, as stunned as all the players were, that I would wake up at some point a few hours later and Ian O'Connor of ESPN would have inked the piece that I'm finding more and more on my social media feed. We've had him on to talk about Belichick and many other things in his book. He is a senior writer at ESPN, and generally, Ian, I'll be honest with you, man, when you show up, I figure like the grown-ups are here, there must be a big story in town because you tend to chase bigger stories, and I guess there was no bigger story than Lamar Jackson, an MVP and 10-point favorite and home playoff game and a chance to be an AFC championship game in Baltimore for the first time since 1971. The stakes were high, and when I left you in the locker room, I wasn't sobbing just yet. I waited till I got home to do that. How you doing, man?
Good, Nestor. How are you? I was in Baltimore assuming that this was going to be the start of a fairly long playoff run, and I did not expect what unfolded, of course. But when it did, I thought it turned into a very compelling story, not one that Baltimore wanted to read. But it was, I'll say this, Tennessee, I did think going in they had a chance, a puncher's chance, maybe better than a puncher's chance to win that game. But the way everything played out was pretty stunning. I think it's one of the more stunning playoff results I've seen in recent years.
Yeah, you were working various ends of the locker room as it unfolded afterward. Quite frankly, I've been in those locker rooms where literally in 2006, Ray Lewis was openly sobbing in the training room and being consoled by Bart Scott and Rex Ryan. And, and I've been there when Steve Smith was sobbing in his locker. I've been there when Lee Evans had a towel over his head and Billy Cundiff missed a kick. I've been there for some of these. This one felt like we'll get you next year to some degree, and I know you caught John Harbaugh at the end as he was sort of working his way through the locker room, sort of being consoling to some players. I didn't sense it that way for Marshall Yanda or Domato Pecco, or some of the veteran guys who might be done their careers, but it was so stunning that I don't know how a lot of the guys that it felt to me like a lot of them hadn't processed it. They'd have to wake up the next day and not have work to go to realize what the hell happened to them, because it did come on very, very quick. And unlike Kansas City on Sunday, they never really came out from under it.
I think that's a great way of putting it, Nestor. I was a little surprised in the locker room that there wasn't more obvious displays of devastation after that game. And then I started thinking about, I think some of these guys are just shocked. And you heard guys in the shower, they were louder than you thought they would have been after a game like that, after a magical season ends that abruptly. But I really think some of it was just what you said. They hadn't processed it yet. And so, and having a conversation in the back of the locker room with John Harbaugh after he cut through the room and hugged guys and consoled them and said, hey, thank you so much for what you gave me this year. And just talking to him, all of a sudden he blurted out, what am I going to do tomorrow? And I think it was just starting to hit guys that this thing's over, that a potential Super Bowl championship team at 14-2 was not going to have a practice or a film session or a game the next day to get ready for. So I do think that after 2 or 3 days of sort of processing it would really set in with a lot of those players that, oh my God, that we just lost a golden opportunity maybe to win a championship. And those don't come around that often. On the other hand, and I brought this up to John Harbaugh, remember what the Virginia Cavaliers had to go through after losing to a school down the road 7 miles away from the stadium here, UMBC. The following year, what did Virginia do? They came back and won the national championship. So I do think that's a realistic scenario for this Ravens team. I think it's a great roster for the most part. I think you have the best player in the league in Lamar Jackson at quarterback. John, for 16 games, was the best coach in the league, I think, without question. So this could end up being something that they point to next year when they're at the Super Bowl. But we don't know that yet, and certainly there's a lot of work to do just to get back to that point.
It was not lost in our Luke Jones, Ian O'Connor, that the 20th anniversary of the Trent Dilfer Super Bowl would be in Tampa next year and potentially the same locker room that the Ravens celebrated in. So that's all we got, dude, right? I mean, there is no more Miami. You know, I was down in Fort Lauderdale planning parties and doing all the stuff because that's what you do when you're 14-2 and you're a favorite. And you know what Ian O'Connor does when you're 14-2 as a favorite is comes to town thinking there's a coronation here and you want to be here for whatever this ride is, and then the Mike Tyson rule happens. You get smacked in the mouth, and then, you know, the second time after the Chargers thing, boy, that ate at Lamar, and I clearly think he has a growth mindset, right? I mean, from where he came from last year after being sort of embarrassed by the Chargers' performance and having to pound sand on that for 9 months, all of them, you know, maybe not the locker room at midnight where we were all a little stunned. I had to wake up on Sunday and realize, oh my God, everything I've done for 5 weeks has gone to hell and is over. And I'm back to wherever I was 6 weeks ago, not planning for a Super Bowl. On a personal level, everybody I'm talking to had flights planned and schedules. And, you know, I know doctors that weren't taking appointments. You know what I mean? Like, all of that sort of stops in every town. And I thought the car crash thing, I thought from the fan standpoint and me being a cocky fan and a 14-2 fan and a 10-point at home and flying to Florida, it felt more like a plane crash. The car crash, you see the other cars and you're sort of weary of them. You're a little, you know that may be the wrong thing. The plane just falls, right? Like, no one saw this coming, right? I don't think maybe the Tennessee Titans, and I'm sure that they fed on no one believes but us. But they're playing football this week, and the rest of these guys have to spend 9 months dealing with that feeling of what happened and when they're at home with their friends. And this is for every team that loses, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I remember back in 1998 or January of 99, Bill Parcells and I was following the Jets that year, and they were in the AFC Championship game in Denver against John Elway, leading, I believe it was 10-0 at halftime, 10-0 early third quarter, and they let it get away from them. Elway ends up winning that game, going to the Super Bowl and winning, and Parcells outside the locker room that evening in Denver, just white as a ghost, saying, you just don't know how much you have to go through just to get back to this day, just to get back to this point. OTAs, mini camp, training camp, preseason, the regular season, to try to keep guys healthy. And guess what? Game one the following year, when they were like a Super Bowl favorite, their starting quarterback, Vinny Testaverde, blows out his Achilles, and they go 8-8 and never got back to the tournament. So a million things can happen that would prevent the Ravens from getting back just to the playoffs, never mind to the Super Bowl. But when you look at the talent on that roster, I think a head coach who's certainly one of the best in the league and the best player and quarterback in Lamar Jackson, I think they should be okay, and we'll learn from this and apply it next year. But I was in town. You sort of guessed correctly. I wasn't even really planning on writing Saturday night. I assumed the Ravens win by 10 to 14 points. I gather some stuff for the following week going into the AFC Championship game, and then I was going to write. But when that happened, obviously, I wanted to put something together on deadline just to capture the moment. And I'll say this: the Titans now do remind me some of the 2011 Giants, who went 9-7 and then didn't lose again. In fact, they were 7-7 and lucked out on Christmas Eve, beating the Jets coming from behind to win that game and never lost again. I think the Titans, you have to give them a legitimate chance to win the AFC title in Kansas City and go on and win the whole thing. They're on that kind of roll. And obviously Tannehill's playing at a much higher level than we saw him play for the most part in Miami. And they've got a really good, dynamic young coach in Mike Vrabel who has them believing. So you put all that together, and I think it's a lot for the Ravens to process. But we've seen devastating things end up fueling a stirring run the following year in other sports, and in this one too. So I think ultimately they'll be okay, but that was a gut punch, and one certainly that was tough to absorb.
Well, and when Harbaugh gets in front of the team and says, I was on the sideline and didn't call the timeout, and Billy Cundiff missed the kick after Lee Evans dropped the ball and all hell broke loose. Next thing you know, we're on the bus and our season's over when we had it on a field goal. Like, literally that happened, and 51 weeks later, they got back and did the same trip, stayed in the same hotel, the same pathway, and beat up on the Patriots and went and won the Super Bowl. And so when John Harbaugh stands in front of the team and says, we did this in 2012 and the 13, then, there's certainly credibility there. But then there's what Marlon Humphrey said, which is, on sports talk radio, until Lamar Jackson wins a playoff game, he's Andy Dalton, right? Like, literally, that's what happens when you don't win playoff games. And we have no idea how long this is going to last, right? Like, the Cam Newton thing looked like that was going to last a decade. That looks like it's over, right, in Carolina. And Andrew Luck and other things that happen in this sport that, to your point, when you're 14-2 and you're 22 or 23 years old, you probably don't process it the same way John Harbaugh does.
No, that's right. But listen, you could even look at, Nestor, you could look at Kansas City, right? They're one play away from going to the Super Bowl last year, and they have a guy who effectively lines up offsides and nullifies a Tom Brady interception and Dee Ford. And so here they are right back in the same spot again in Kansas City hosting an AFC title game. So they pulled it off, and that was a devastating moment for a young quarterback in Patrick Mahomes. Now, granted, they had gotten at least to the conference championship game, and the Ravens didn't this year, but they're back in the same place with another chance to go to the Super Bowl after a devastating development. A guy lining up offsides cost them a Super Bowl. So it can be done. I'm not saying it will be done, but when you look at that Ravens roster and the amount of guys that are expected to be back, Lamar Jackson being a year better and a year smarter and all those things, I think the Ravens, I would look at it optimistically as opposed to, oh my God, what if we never get back again, which is a possibility, but I don't think it's a great one. I think that, listen, John Harbaugh lost some tough games before he won the Super Bowl. The Ravens do know that they have a head coach who has proven he can win a Super Bowl. The Chiefs don't have that. Andy Reid's never proven that. So I think that's one thing that the players with Baltimore, when they come back next year for that long grind, starting with the voluntary part of the off-season program, then the voluntary part, preseason, regular season, and everything else, they at least know we have a coach who knows how to win the Super Bowl, and I think that will help them.
In processing the game and everything that went wrong briefly, because we're going to be doing that all offseason, I keep thinking to myself, Super Bowl week, I'm going to be sitting there with 100 guys like you, day in and day out. They're all going to sit down at my purple table and say, what the hell happened to the Ravens, right? So, in the game itself and the way the game played out, boy, there's so much blame to go around that it isn't about one missed field goal or one player, one anything. It was sort of anything and everything. And I said that the week that the handoff goes wrong and they fumble the ball, the week that the ball goes off the shoulder pads and up into the air into an arms of a safety, or the block punt or the block kick or whatever weird stuff that happens when the winds of January get the blowing, it was sort of like every single thing happened to them. And then it all happened to the Chiefs again 24 hours later, right? And they battled.
Right.
It was such a strange juxtaposition of Saturday night with the Ravens, and then Kansas City comes roaring back to say, well, maybe it's their year. And it's But all that being said, you would think that through the course of the season, over 3 months of playing perfect football almost for 12 weeks, at some point something is going to go wrong, and then it's how you react to that. It wasn't a very strong reaction over 4 quarters, even when they couldn't tackle Derrick Henry when the game was on the line at the end.
But I remember saying before the game that Clifton Brown was a great writer that I got to know in New York years ago, and we were sitting there at the table. I said, I really feel the Ravens are going to win this game. They just can't get down 14-0, and guess what? They got down 14-0. And the reason I felt that way, Nestor, is after having 20 days off effectively, 20 days since they've played a meaningful game with all their starters in there, playing throughout, it would be tough to overcome that, the rest conspiring against them. Now they're down 14-0, and you start to press. You're not sharp to begin with because of the, and I'm not trying to make an excuse for them, but it is a fact that they hadn't played a real game in a long time. And I think that first interception, now, could Andrews have made that catch? Yes. But he's on a bad wheel. It should have been a better pass. Lamar Jackson should have been more accurate with that throw, and it would have been a catch. And you got to feel if they go down and score on that possession, the whole thing could have been different. And frankly, the whole thing would have been different had the Patriots maybe been the 2 seed and things worked out differently where the Ravens are playing the Texans in that first game, I just thought that was a bad matchup. I thought Tennessee, given the fact that they got a win under their belt against Belichick and Brady, physical team, a coach who as a player won 3 Super Bowls and certainly knows how to win big games, and Tannehill playing at a higher level, getting that game on the road in New England under their, having that behind them, giving them some confidence. And the Ravens have been just sitting around a long time. And so you put all that together and you had the result that you got. And there really isn't a whole lot you could do about it other than learn from it and come back next year. And again, the most obvious and recent example I could think of was the University of Virginia Cavaliers basketball team losing to UMBC in the most devastating defeat maybe in the history of the NCAA tournament, a 16-1, and not losing by 4 or 3 or 2 or 1, but by 20. And then somehow being a national laughingstock and coming back the next year to win the national title. Boy, there's proof right there it can happen. And certainly this loss was not nearly as devastating as that one was to Virginia, but it was the first thing that came to mind to me in assessing, okay, where do the Ravens go from here? And I do think I would be very surprised if next year they're not 13-3, 12-4 at worst, and back in position to make a really good run.
You remember when Maryland won their national championship, they had urinated away a 20-point lead against Duke in Minnesota, let it get away from them, and then the next year they got to Atlanta. And, there's lots of stories. I mean, any of the 83 Orioles would tell you that was residue of losing the 79 World Series. They were almost 15 of the same players on those teams back in those days where players didn't move around. And, there is something about the togetherness of a bunch of young guys that I think it's easy as a fan to buy into it. I mean, it certainly wasn't a fluke 14-2 season, but it was an unexpected 14-2 season. They were ahead of schedule, right, as an organization.
They were, and maybe there were people in that organization that felt, we understand the natural progression of a championship team in sports. Usually you suffer some painful losses in the postseason for 2-3 years, and finally you're ready to break through. And maybe some people in the organization felt, well, we had a lot of pain in that Chargers game last year, people trying to boo Lamar Jackson off the field. He hung in there, got him back in position, maybe win the game. They don't win. That was a pretty painful day. But after going 14-2, you're thinking, okay, we have home field advantage. Now the Patriots are out of the tournament, and here come the Titans, who are 9-7. We should handle them, and we'll be in good shape in the AFC Championship game. And there's more pain, a lot more pain than there was even last year. And so maybe it was somewhat unexpected to have to go through that again and not even get through one round, but it's reality now, and they have to deal with it as an organization, and we'll find out just how strong they are. And I suspect that Lamar Jackson will come back even better and stronger and smarter, and John Harbaugh will too, and they'll figure it out next year. It might be, I don't expect them to go 14-2, and that's okay. But I see a 12-4 season where they're in really good position to make a run, and then they'll have to take advantage of that opportunity and not get caught off guard like they were this year. Now, I don't know exactly what John Harbaugh should have done differently in this 20-day pseudo layoff. I really don't know what I would have done differently as a coach. You had to rest guys that final game. Imagine if you got Lamar Jackson or somebody else hurt, you never hear the end of it. So I don't know what you can do differently, but there's something there to be learned, and they have to figure it out.
He is the author of Belichick. You can go check it out. Ian_O'Connor, the way to find him out on Twitter. Senior writer, ESPN, and writing about Coach K. Your Coach K book might not sell too well here in Maryland. I don't know. We still have that, anti-Duke thing, even though, they're never going to be a rival, ever again, which kind of stinks for everybody associated here. But certainly love and hate for Coach K. And that you're a little ways away on that. And, hey, the Belichick thing, it's fascinating that he's out of the tournament this time. It's a rare January when we don't have him to hate on this weekend, right?
That's right, and it is different. I think seeing some new storylines is never a bad thing for the NFL, and I like the way that these matchups are shaping up in terms of what the Super Bowl can be, and I think that's okay. And by the way, when you mentioned that there might be some local hatred for Coach K and that Duke dynasty, I think sometimes people are intrigued by figures that they can't stand from a distance. I found that out with my Belichick book. There were people who told me, I really hated the Patriots, But I was fascinated by them, and I felt that they were a mysterious program, and I wanted to learn more about it, and I found I did after reading your book. So hopefully people will feel the same way in your neck of the woods about Coach K.
Well, of course. And, behind all of that winning of him or Saban or something is something we can use in real life, and unlike the cheating of Bill Belichick, as we all know about. So I've always got to get that in there, get a little cheap shot in on Bill. But, hey, are they done, Belichick and Brady? Are you buying into this San Diego or Los Angeles or London or whatever Chargers are being called today? You buying into that?
No, I'm not. I think Brady will be back. I think part of the reason he'll be back is when you look around the league at some of the options and alternatives, to me, they're not very good. Chargers, Colts, Dolphins, I don't see it. Now, if the New York Giants were set up to make a run, and he said, you know what, and his wife loves New York, they have a place in Tribeca, and I want to try to win a championship to finish my career without Bill Belichick, but do it in a big market like New York, I could see that. The other thing I could see is if San Francisco, his childhood team, his dream growing up was to be the next Joe Montana or to play his position, if that job was open and the would-be successor that he forced out didn't have that job in Jimmy Garoppolo, I could see that as well. But when you look around the league, Nestor, tell me the really good fit for Tom Brady. I don't see it right now. And maybe the Titans would have been if Tannehill wasn't playing at this level, but he is. So I think he returns to the Patriots, and I think they'll be right back in the playoffs as division champs for a 12th straight year.
Look, you're an old sage guy like me at doing this. If I had ever told you there would be a 42-year-old quarterback who's a free agent, that there would be any attraction to any 42-year-old quarterback in free agency. It's otherworldly, right? My dad would tell me about George Blanda, and I'd say, well, that would never happen, right? And then this happens.
Well, you're talking about the greatest quarterback to ever play the game, arguably the greatest football player ever when you look at performance and body of work over a long period of time. So I do think there'll be interest, no question about it. The guy can still play. He made some throws in that game against Tennessee that were really good throws. I was there, including a third down throw to Edelman among four defenders. That was as good as any mid-range pass he's thrown in recent years. And by the way, if Edelman doesn't drop a Pop Warner pass that he should have had right in his belly, maybe they get a first down. They might go down and kick a field goal and win that game. We're not having this conversation. So in the end, what you're saying as you come in here as the author of Belichick is that the Patriots really did the dirty thing by sending the Titans here. I'm telling you, I just think if they ended up playing, say, the Texans, they win that game. I think the Titans were a really bad matchup. Derrick Henry right now is the best player in the league. He used to play for Lamar Jackson as the best player in the league. So the Baltimore ended up playing like the worst possible opponent. Good aggressive coach, great running back, quarterback now hot and playing at a higher level than we thought he would, a defense that's become opportunistic and tough, and you put all that in place, and it was just a very difficult proposition for a favorite team with a lot of pressure on it after going 14-2 with 20 days basically off, and you take away that interception maybe on that early drive, and we have a different story, but you can't. And listen, Tennessee controlled that game. They deserved to win. They did, and now Baltimore has to deal with the fallout. And I think the Ravens are a strong organization, and they will.
I said this week, either Ryan Tannehill will be going back to Miami to win a Super Bowl, or Terrell Suggs will be going to Miami as a Chief to win one. So there's always a story around every corner. Ian O'Connor will be writing about all of them at ESPN as a senior writer. You can follow him at Ian_O'Connor. And the book is Belichick, even though he's working on Coach K right now. Hey, Harbaugh will have you working on his book if you get another championship, right? So we'll see how that goes. Great to have you on, Ian. I appreciate you. Always great to have you aboard.
All right. Thanks so much, Nestor. Take care.
Ian O'Connor saw him in the locker room late into the night talking to John Harbaugh. Then I read the piece that he wrote out at ESPN about a gut punch, a car crash, and a stunning upset. And he just admitted he wasn't even here to write this piece. And there it is. And obviously the car crash came the words of Matthew Judon, who may have played his last game as a Raven. So we'll be monitoring all that. We'll be at Super Bowl 54 in Miami. I don't know that I'll be partying on the city where the heat is on. I don't know that I'll be up all night on the beach to the break of dawn. But Luke and I are going to Miami one way or another, and I'm sure we will be talking about the undoing of the Baltimore Ravens at the hands of the Tennessee Titans, and maybe Ryan Tannehill will be on the big wall behind me. We'll find out. Nasty at WNST.net, the way to find me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 at WNST Towson, Baltimore. We never stop talking Baltimore sports.